Morning to you. A report from the police watchdog has said that preventing violence against women and girls should be given the same priority as countering terrorism. Official statistics show there are 1.6 million female victims of domestic abuse in England and Wales, but three-quarters of cases are closed early without charges ever being brought. And the watchdog identified what it called a staggering variation between different police forces in how crimes like domestic abuse are treated. The report was commissioned by the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, after the murder of Sarah Everard by a Metropolitan Police officer earlier this year. Jemima Walker reports.
After the murder of Sarah Everard, the message from women was clear.
Streets are ours and we deserve to be safe on the streets!
In the wake of the marketing executive's death, the Home Secretary ordered a major report. Published today, that report demands a radical shift in policing. Stopping violence against women, it says, should be as much of a priority as fighting terrorism.
One woman every 3 days is killed by a man. There's 1.6 million victims of domestic abuse. And there are crimes like stalking and voyeurism and online abuse, where 8 out of 10 victims are women or girls. And the position really is quite staggering. And the police alone cannot solve this problem.
But there are areas where, according to the report, police can and must improve. It says there are major gaps in data collection, which does not allow for proper oversight or accountability. The use of the domestic violence disclosure scheme, where there are fears about someone's past convictions, requires immediate improvement. And there are extreme concerns that around three-quarters of reported domestic abuse cases are closed early without the suspect being charged. Erica says she was abused and now campaigns to get more police support for victims.
With my experience, I felt like my case was just dismissed, pushed out the way so that they could essentially just keep going. I don't believe it's something they do intentionally. They're not malicious, but they do what they can, which is they work with what they have. So essentially it comes down to the government to be able to support the police, Met Police, etc., anywhere around the country, to reassure people that they are safe. If they have something they want to report, they will be listened to and supported.
The police watchdog points to an epidemic of violence against women and girls. For campaigners, it's a warning which should have been issued long ago.
I think the report focuses a lot on women as victims, and it is right that there needs to be better support for women as victims, but it doesn't talk enough about prevention, how to tackle men as perpetrators, and how to spot some of those early signs of misogyny and tackle them head on and early on before the worst case scenario happens.
The report says the whole system, policing, health and education, must take a fundamentally new approach. For the women who still walk with keys between their fingers, it's been a long time coming. Jemima Walker, Sky News.
Well, the Environment Secretary, George Eustice, is here. It's good to see you this morning. Look, this report was commissioned by the Home Secretary. Does that mean the government is going to act on the recommendations?
Well, obviously, look, Priti Patel will now look at these recommendations, but I think, this report does highlight some differences between police forces. And I think in these sorts of situations, violence against women is a serious problem. Domestic violence has also been a problem for some time now. And what we really need to do is to learn from those police forces that are addressing this well. And I think the report highlights that some of them are doing far better than others, and actually try and replicate those approaches that work in parts of the country.
I mean, it's not purely a police issue, though, is it? I mean, this report says three-quarters of domestic abuse cases are closed without even a suspect being charged. And not all, but some of that is down to victims sort of withdrawing the complaint, if you like. I mean, there's a wider societal issue here, isn't there?
Yes, well, it is. And I know in Devon and Cornwall, the police force where I come from, we have some real problems with domestic violence in some of our communities. And actually, often, some of the things that can work quite well are, involvement to help the partners that get angry and get violent, and actually to try and help, diffuse and manage some of those stressful situations in the home, which often are behind some of these things. So you can get those other sorts of interventions that can help deal with problems of domestic violence.
I mean, I know there is already a scheme in place to help sort of children, primary school children, learn about healthy relationships. But if children are being brought up in a home where there is violence or aggression, can they be targeted in a way to make sure they don't get caught in that spiral?
Well, we have lots of family support workers and interventions, and obviously social services and local authorities. It's not just those that are under very close watch. They also have family support workers that try to do this. But, a chaotic home environment where there's lots of anger, lots of violence, isn't a great environment for those children. And there are some good programmes that I've seen where you get interventions to try to defuse those types of situations, get both parents in that relationship to learn to sort of manage their anger issues. And that can actually deal with some of the sort of lower level domestic violence. Of course, you then get still those very serious cases, and that's when the police do have to drive it through and take a prosecution forward.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what the government can do to signal its intent, what about the Istanbul Convention? I mean, that was an international agreement to come to sort of common standards in how we deal with violence against women and girls. It was open for signatures in 2011, 10 years ago. 45 countries have signed. The UK still hasn't. I mean, do we need to do that?
Well, look, I think the fact that Priti Patel, commissioned this report, asked for this piece of work, shows the seriousness with which she takes this issue. And I think what we really want is that, domestic policy response to deal with this problem, learn from those police forces that are addressing the problem and doing well, and replicate that in the others. And I'm sure that's exactly what Priti Patel will want to be doing with police forces around the country.
OK, look, we're going to have a lot more on that throughout the course of the morning. But in the meantime, can we talk about COVID and travel as someone who's finally going on a holiday next month? This is particularly interesting to me, I have to say. What is happening? Are we expecting an announcement on these sort of PCR tests as you return to the UK? Is that going to be happening today?
Well, my understanding is no decisions have actually been taken yet, although I understand there may be a meeting today to review this. We regularly review those travel restrictions. Obviously, we took a very important step a bit earlier this summer when we removed the need to quarantine for those coming from amber list countries. That was a really big step forward. But we have retained the need for testing, and that's really so that we can pick up any variants of concern through that PCR test. But look, I know that this has been raised by the travel industry, that they think some of that testing may be unnecessary, may be onerous. The government will be listening to that, and obviously the COVID subcommittee of Cabinet that decides these things will be considering that probably later today.
I mean, there seems to be a pretty clear indication, and I don't quite know where it all comes from, but lots of rumours flying about that PCRs could be scrapped for lateral tests, which obviously are cheaper and easier. Is that something you've heard?
Well, I haven't heard, because I'm not on that particular subcommittee that deals with this. And obviously, they will want to consider all of the evidence before taking a final decision. I mean, the rationale for the PCR test is that you can do sort of genome sequencing of variants, and you can, therefore, detect possible variants of concern. And the difficulty with the lateral flow test, although it's cheaper and it's simpler to do, is that it's not able to pick up those variants. So that's the rationale, and been the rationale so far, for making sure that we keep some of that PCR testing in place.
But when you look at the situation that our COVID infection rates are higher than they are in a lot of mainland Europe, particularly, even though obviously our vaccination system is pretty good. But with that in mind, I mean, it does raise questions, doesn't it? I mean, even the Health Secretary made the point that he thought this needed to be seriously looked at.
Yes, so Secretary did say that we would, look at this. He doesn't want to have unnecessary testing in place. But I think he also recognises the value of those PCR tests. So, there's a discussion to be had about this. As I said, we've already made that big step forward of ending the need for quarantine from people returning from amber list countries. That was a game changer. If we can do further refinements on testing, then obviously we'll look at that to reduce those burdens. But we do also need to be mindful and vigilant against new variants coming in. We have done incredibly well with our vaccination programme. It's enabled us to open things up again, and the vaccination that we've done is preventing those hospitalisations and keeping that mortality right down. But what we don't want is to end up with a variant that can evade the vaccine, and that's what we've got to remain vigilant about.
It is reaching a critical point, though, for the travel industry, isn't it? Obviously, it's been a dreadful couple of years, and we're now easing off into a sort of quieter season. So if there was ever a right time to do this, it's now, isn't it?
Well, look, it's been a very, very difficult time for the travel industry. We absolutely recognise that. That's why we've done all we can to, have those easements in place, reduce the restrictions as quickly as we can. But, arguably the biggest threat to the travel industry is that we do get another variant that manages to get around the vaccine, that the vaccine can't deal with. Then we're into another full lockdown, and that's not what we want. That's why we've taken this cautiously step by step, because we want each step we take to be irreversible.
I know you're making us wait for any announcement, and that's fair enough to an extent, but there is also talk of scrapping the amber and just having red and green. Now, that may seem sensible to a lot of people. The problem is that's following on from what the Labour Party was demanding months ago.
Well, I actually still think there's the rationale for amber, and has been, because we have gained by having those PCR tests on people returning, because it has given us extra protection, extra surveillance against those potential variants of concern. The red list countries remain the highest risks, but we think there's been that rationale for the amber list. And by the way, I'm not waiting for the announcement. I'm waiting for a decision that I understand has not yet been discussed, and perhaps will be later today. OK.
Can we talk reshuffle? Because obviously you've kept your job, which is very good news to you, and you've got the first meeting of the new cabinet, about 9 o'clock this morning, something like that?
Yes.
What has the Prime Minister been trying to achieve with this reshuffle? Because, he certainly hasn't created a cabinet with a sort of single ideology, has he?
No, but I think, the Conservative Party has always been a broad church, and any government, any Prime Minister will want to bring together a cabinet of all the talents, and will want to make sure you've got lots of different perspectives represented. That's how you get a good debate in cabinet, and that's exactly what he's done. And I think really what he's seeking to do with this reshuffle is get the team in place that he wants to, deliver post-pandemic the recovery of our country, to build back better, build back greener, get our economy going again, get wages up, get people in better paid jobs, improve skills. This is his big focus over the remaining part of this Parliament, and he's assembled a team to do that.
So, very much want to focus on a domestic agenda, and within that, then, how big a role is Michael Gove going to play? Housing Secretary, and yet the sort of levelling up agenda seems to fall within his remit. Now, that's going to be crucial moving forward for the Conservatives, isn't it? Yes.
Well, look, I worked very closely with Michael Gove when he was in my own department, in DEFRA, when I was a minister there. He's got a formidable intellect, very good at problem solving, very good at getting to grip with detail quickly. There are some very important reforms we've got on planning, where we want to simplify the process, but make sure we've got the right protections in place, make sure we build aesthetically beautiful housing around the country, and not the usual sort of identikit things that we've become used to. So I think he's going to be in a very good position to take those reforms forward, and also he retains that brief around the wider UK, and that's a passion of his.
But is it right that at this point in a government cycle that we are, it seems pretty clear you're gearing up for the next election. That could be 2023, it could be 2024. Oliver Dowden seems to be pretty convinced that now you need to get on an election footing. Is that your understanding?
Well, look, I think what Oliver Dowden said is we should be ready for an election whenever it might come. And that's what every party chairman will always do. Their task is to make sure that the party is ready. But for Cabinet as a whole, our priority is to deliver. We've still got several years left of this Parliament, and we've got a lot that we want to achieve. There's going to be a lot of challenges that need addressing post this pandemic. That's going to be our absolute focus.
And can you do that within, even if you've got sort of 2 or 3 years left, can you deliver everything that was promised back in 2019?
Well, look, the pandemic wasn't in anyone's manifesto, as the Prime Minister said. So we've already had to take difficult but necessary and right choices on things like the the health and social care levy that we've introduced to deal with that huge backlog in the NHS and also to get our social care system on a firmer, more viable footing. So we're willing to take those difficult decisions. But yeah, we also want to crack on and deliver many of those things that were in our manifesto, delivering for the environment, which is very much a focus for me with an environment bill going through now, improving our approach on things like animal welfare. So I've got bills like that I'm focusing on. Other departments will have their own priorities that were also manifesto commitments.
OK. Minister, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, still to come on the programme this morning. In the wake of the Violence Against Women report calling for fundamental change, we'll speak to Labour's Shadow Policing Minister Sarah Jones at 8:05. And at 8:20, we'll talk to the Managing Director of TUI ahead of the government's international travel announcement expected later on today. And the champion returns. Emma Raducanu is back home after her victory at the US Open. Jackie Beltrao is going to be talking to her later in the programme, and you can catch that full interview at about 9:30. Now, an American judge has accused Prince Andrew of playing a game of hide-and-seek behind palace walls over a lawsuit seeking damages against him for sexual assault. Virginia Giuffre is pursuing legal actions over allegations that she was forced to have sex with him when she was 17. Meanwhile, a separate court in Manhattan has ruled that Prince Andrew can unseal a settlement agreement reached between Ms Giuffre and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein in 2009. The Prince's lawyers say the agreement prevents her from pursuing legal action against him. Prince Andrew denies all the allegations and says the abuse never happened. Two men have been charged with the murder of 29-year-old journalist Lyra McKee, who was shot dead in Derry in 2019. Well, let's get the latest from Shingi Mararike, who's in the newsroom. Who are these men, Shingi?
Morning, Stephen. So these two men will appear later this morning via video link at Derry Magistrates Court, charged with the murder of Lyra McKee. And police Northern Ireland have put out a statement detailing a bit more on who they are. In that statement, they say this: detectives from the police service of Northern Ireland's major investigation team have charged two men with the murder of 29-year-old journalist Lyra McKee, who was shot dead by terrorists in Derry on April 18th, 2019. The pair, aged 21 and 33, have also been charged with possession of a firearm and ammunition with intent to endanger life, riot, possession of petrol bombs, throwing petrol bombs and arson. The 33-year-old has also been charged with robbery. A third man, aged 20, will also appear in court today. He's been charged with riot, possession of petrol bombs and throwing petrol bombs. And then on top of this, we have another 19-year-old man who was also arrested during the same operation, who has been released while we wait on a report to Northern Ireland's Public Prosecution Service. So, like I said, today, three men will appear in court in connection with this case, and we know that two of those men have been charged with murder.
Shingi, thank you. Well, let's have a look at some of the other headlines for you this morning. New research suggests long COVID symptoms rarely persist beyond 12 weeks in children, unlike adults. The review published in the Paediatric Infectious Disease Journal suggests that long COVID in children and adolescents is less common than previously feared. A 5-year-old has won a legal case against the Environment Agency over gases from a landfill site that his mum said risked shortening his life. Their lawyers argued there was a public health emergency around Wally's Quarry near Newcastle-under-Lyme in Staffordshire. A doctor told a hearing that Matthew Richards' recovery from chronic lung disease was being hit by emissions from the site.
It's absolutely amazing. Matthew he's not just fought for his own fresh air, he's fought for a whole community with thousands and thousands of people who are suffering. The complaints are coming in from, sometimes they've been coming up from 10 miles away from the quarry. So he's fought for thousands.
The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, has criticised climate change protesters for halting traffic on the M25, describing them as selfish. Protesters from the Insulate Britain group stopped thousands of motorists at 4 different junctions shortly after 8 in the morning on Wednesday for the second time in 3 days. There's a new name at the top of the Sunday Times University League table. St Andrews has claimed first place, with Oxford and Cambridge knocked off the top spots for the first time ever. The inventor and entrepreneur Sir Clive Sinclair has died at the age of 81. He helped develop the pocket calculator and crucially brought home computers to British high street stores at relatively affordable prices. But perhaps he was less known for his less successful invention, the Sinclair C5. It's an iconic design, though. He was given a knighthood in 1983. Now, analysis by the Sky News data team has shown the number of people who outstay their visas and remain in the UK without permission each year is significantly higher than the numbers of migrants crossing the English Channel in small boats. Between 2018 and 2020, an average of 11,400 people smuggled themselves into Britain each year by boat. 6 times that number, more than 66,000 remain in the UK illegally, having overstayed their visas. An annual average of 5,200 stay after being refused asylum, and a similar number come in on false documents. The figures are an estimate since official data is incomplete. Lisa Holland reports.
Well, I'm stuck, so I can't go forward.
It's like you don't exist.
No. Feel very sad. Yeah, very sad.
Moomin came to the UK as a teenage boy 12 years ago, but has missed out entirely on the rites of passage into adulthood, lost in the UK's asylum system.
My life is too hard. Especially I don't have any paperwork. So anyway, when I go to, for the job or these things, they need the paperwork and these things. So I don't have that.
Moomin, on the left of frame, says this picture was taken with his brothers in Afghanistan shortly before he departed, aged 14, after refusing to join the Taliban. He arrived on the back of a lorry. His lawyer says half of his time here has been as an illegal immigrant, though he's lodged another appeal. There's a lack of data, but the latest research estimates around 1 million people in total are in the UK illegally, and the overwhelming majority, like Moomin, did not arrive by small boat.
What would you like your life to be like?
I want to be like a good businessman, in future. So, and good my own house and own business. I don't have any money, £1 I buy chicken chips for myself.
The state doesn't want Moomin, but his Afghan community does, staying with friends and helping in a butcher's where they say they give him food and pocket money, the only way he can survive. He says he's had spells in college and for a few years was allowed to work. Others in the shop say they feel sorry for Moomin because he's trapped in a life that's so unfulfilled.
He came to me, he said, please help me, and that time I helped him. Yeah, but not all the time I can't help him because I have my own family as well. He tried to be happy, but he can't because, without document, he don't have, so it's very hard, not easy. So he's sad all the time.
We didn't provide the Home Office with Moomin's details, so they were unable to address his case specifically. But a spokesperson said the government is committed to ensuring asylum claims are considered without unnecessary delays. And its new plan for immigration seeks to welcome those who come through safe and legal routes. Lisa Holland, Sky News.
China has warned the new Defence Cooperation Pact between the UK, the United States and Australia risks the major new defence alliance announced between the UK, the United States and Australia. It's been sending ripples around the world with no shortage of strong words issued by global powers outside the arrangement. China said the move risks catalysing a nuclear arms race. The French Foreign Minister described it as a stab in the back and totally incomprehensible. The Italian government has approved some of the strictest anti-COVID measures in the world, making it compulsory for all workers either to show proof of vaccination, a negative test, or recent recovery from infection. Any worker who fails to present a valid health certificate will be suspended without pay and will be fined, but can't be sacked. The new rules come into force from October the 15th. A lawyer who represented Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential bid has been charged with lying to the FBI. Michael Sussman, a former federal prosecutor with ties to the Democratic National Committee, was indicted for giving false statements to the FBI in a meeting 2 months before the 2016 election. More than 10,000 migrants have set up a makeshift camp under a bridge connecting Mexico and Texas in the latest US border emergency. The migrants, most of whom are from Haiti, have made the journey across the Rio Grande with little food and water and in temperatures approaching 40 degrees Celsius. This is Sky News. Let's have a look at the weather for you today. And it's going to be wet at times in the west, but elsewhere mostly fine with some warm sunny spells. Much of England, Wales and eastern Scotland will be dry first thing, patches of low cloud or fog perhaps. Going to be cloudier further west with outbreaks of rain and some brisk winds. Rain, heavy at times, will slowly push eastwards across Ireland, Northern Ireland and Scotland into Cornwall and Pembrokeshire as well. The rest of Britain mostly dry with some warm sunny spells. Meanwhile, brighter skies and a few scattered showers will follow to Western Ireland. Well, still to come for you this morning, where do we go next in protecting women and girls from violence? We'll speak to Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary in a couple of minutes. The UK's international travel rules are expected to be changed later, with reports that PCR tests for double-jabbed holidaymakers coming back to the UK could be scrapped. Now, a few minutes ago, the Environment Secretary George Eustice told me that ministers will discuss the issue later on today.
Well, my understanding is no decisions have actually been taken yet, although I understand there may be a meeting today to review this. We regularly review those travel restrictions. Obviously, we took a very important step a bit earlier this summer when we removed the need to quarantine for those coming from amber list countries. That was a really big step forward. But we have retained the need for testing, and that's really so that we can pick up any variants of concern through that PCR test.
Ali Fortescue is here now. He didn't give a lot away. I mean, he claimed he didn't actually know what any decision was going to be, but what are the options?
Well, I think what people are expecting is a simplification of what has been there until now. Of course, since June, we've had quarantine. Since February, we've had some hotel quarantine as well, lots of testing requirements. And there has been speculation that what we will see is effectively fewer tests needed for people who are vaccinated. So people won't necessarily need a PCR test. If they come back, they could take a lateral flow test instead on day 2. They might not even need a lateral flow test before boarding the flight to the UK. So there has been speculation that we would see a simplification of the testing requirements and that we could see the amber list scrapped altogether. So instead what there would be is fewer countries on the red list, and they would be really no-go, and then a green list, which would be go, you can go on holiday to those places. But I think what we heard from George Eustice there was a pretty cautious tone, actually. He was talking about the importance of PCR tests for spotting new variants. He said there's still a rationale for the amber list. So I was quite surprised, really, by how cautious his tone was if we are indeed going to see, as speculation suggests, the amber list scrapped this afternoon. He did, though, confirm that the subcommittee will be meeting, that no decision has been taken yet. So I think watch this space.
Talking about people meeting, it's a new cabinet meeting this morning, isn't it?
That's right. Very exciting. The excitement is palpable here in Westminster. The brand new cabinet, of course, to remind you of some of the big changes. We've got Liz Truss moving to Foreign Secretary. Now 2 of 4 of those great officers of state will be women. She is the first Conservative female Foreign Secretary, replacing Dominic Raab, who, of course, goes to the Ministry of Justice in a bit of a demotion. We've got Michael Gove moving to housing, Nadhim Zahawi going to education. So lots of changes. A couple more announcements for junior ministers expected today. But, yeah, lots of excitement, that very first cabinet meeting. And lots on the agenda, a real shift towards the domestic policy we expect.
OK, Ali, thank you. Now, back to our top story this morning, and that is that report from the police watchdog, which says tackling violence against women and girls is as important as counter-terrorism. It was commissioned by the Home Secretary in the wake of the murder of Sarah Everard, and it found there were problems, unevenness and inconsistencies in police handling of misogynistic violence. Well, let's talk to Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, Zoe Billingham, and it's good to see you this morning. Look, what are the key points here?
So we face an epidemic of violence against women and girls, and this report lays this out in really the starkest terms. 1.6 million female victims of domestic abuse. 1 woman is killed every 3 days by a man, and half the women that we surveyed are fearful to walk out in their own neighbourhoods. So what we're saying is, rather than ask the police to do more of the same, more training, better supervision, we're saying that there needs to be a bold and radical approach to tackling violence against women and girls. There needs to be a whole new system brought into place, focusing on prevention, looking at better funding, making sure that we ruthlessly track down perpetrators, all the sorts of things that we see in high harm crimes like terrorism and county lines and serious and organised crimes. That very same approach, we say, needs to be applied in stopping harm happening to women and girls up and down this country.
So how do we apply that then? And you talk of prevention, and obviously that is the best way forward. But I mean, that's a society-wide issue, isn't it? Not just a police issue.
Absolutely, and you're spot on, and that's really what we've said in this report. The police alone cannot solve this problem. There needs to be a change in tack and a whole system approach. So partners from local authorities through to probation services and the courts, the health services, schools and education all need to be mandated by government to work together in partnership to prevent crime happening in the first place, but also to identify very clear strategies as to how they're going to work together to get after the perpetrators, to actually stop them offending. Time and time again, we found some perpetrators that were harming at least 8 or 9 victims at any one time. This is a really broad, widespread, deep ingrained, deep-rooted problem within society. But I'm really optimistic, and I have to be because there is no alternative, that actually working together, there can be a change.
You've said it's as important as countering terrorism, which, puts it into some sort of context, as to where it should be on our priority list. But the problem has to be surely that, terrorism has an ideology. It's a warped and perverted ideology, but it is there nonetheless. When it comes to this sort of domestic violence, there isn't an ideology, is there? And we don't quite understand why it happens in the first place.
Yeah, no, you're quite right. And it takes very, very different forms. Violence against women and girls could be stalking, it could be voyeurism, it could be harm created online. It's so broad and it's so deep. And of course, what we're not saying is that the crimes are similar to the crimes of terrorism, but the approach that the police and agencies take to tackling terrorism is what we want to see in tackling violence against women and girls. So there's a very clear national strategy. Police forces know exactly what they need to do. Other partners are required to cooperate to prevent terrorism happening. There's proper funding and there's a real clarity of focus and mission. And that's exactly what we say needs to happen in terms of the attack, if you like, the collective public agencies need to bring to bear on stopping violence against women and girls happening. And we don't choose words like epidemic lightly, but we have seen through this work the volume, the breadth, the depth and the harm that is being caused by women, to women every single day by men, and that needs to stop.
How do you go about, with all of these different measures, empowering women? Because that's surely got to be really important here. When you look at the figures in your report saying 3/4 of cases are closed without a charge being brought. In not all cases, but in some of those cases, that's down to the victims sort of withdrawing their complaint. How do you empower women through all of this to make sure that they do stand their ground, they are supported enough to follow through on a case?
Yeah, there's lots of things that need to change in that. And of course, some women are very clear that they don't want a criminal justice outcome, and that's absolutely right for them, but they do want the harm to stop. But other women are being discouraged quite early on in the process. If they've been the victim of a serious crime, they're being it's being suggested it's going to take a very long time to get to court, that they may have to hand over their mobile phone. What we want to see is the police going in with an attitude that we're the police, we've got certain tools, we've got certain powers that we are going to apply as best we possibly can, to keep you safe before we bring the perpetrator to justice, but also to support you, to gather the evidence, to make sure that we build the case, to not push it back onto women to make decisions, but to take the case forward so that perpetrators are brought to justice. And we know from our research that if one perpetrator is brought to justice and hopefully receives a sufficiently stiff sentence within the courts, and that's one perpetrator taken off the streets who's then not able to harm not only the victim survivor but also other women, because there is often a real pattern of offending that we see in perpetrators that prey on vulnerable women in particular.
Zoe Billingham, it's good to talk to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
OK, time to have a look at the sport for you this morning with David.
Record breakers. Me too. World's slowest dog.
This Sports Bulletin is brought to you by the Vitality Running World Cup.
Welcome home. Yes.
Welcome to my hood.
Yes. Lovely place.
I'm surprised you've not got the Yorkshire accent. You've been here that long.
I've been here like, what's it, 11 years now?
Yeah.
11, 12 years. What's it, A up, Doc?
No, don't say that.
A up, Doc. What else is there? Do you know what it is though, right? In all these years I've been here, all I've been to, I'd say, is like Nando's, Meadowhall, Tesco.
Sheffield is like
probably the casino.
Yeah, but Sheffield's like a big village. Everybody knows everybody. When you're out, I know.
Yeah. You see what I mean? So that's when I go out and Naz says, oh, look, everyone knows you're out. Everyone says they used to see you at Nando's, but no one sees you anymore. I just think that the pressure, you know, the pressure's gone up. So I just kind of reserve myself a bit more, and training pressure's increased, and they expect a lot more from me. So I've got to kind of rest my body more. That's why I don't go out as much.
Do you, did you miss Rob at the first part of this training camp?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
It made a massive difference.
Yeah, definitely. Having him, Rob he's a gaffer, isn't he? Do you know what I mean? Having the gaffer there and not there is like, you feel the presence. But in a way, right, it worked out well because we've got a good team, and I always look at like old school training where, like, let's say Freddie Roach had Manny Pacquiao's assistant trainers with him, Teddy Atlas, Kevin Rooney, Custamato. Certain athletes tend to move to different trainers, but what we done, we kept it all in house, and we was able to still perform and train even when one person's away. We're still able to construct a good training camp. Even though there's one system, a coach has to say, I'm training these guys with one system, but I also have to understand individually what makes Johnny tick and what makes AJ tick. So mine might be, I might need motivation. I might need that motivation, like, come on, champ, you're great, you're doing this for your kids. You might need more work. You know what, we're gonna do 20 rounds. You're the fittest guy going. That's why we're working 20 rounds, and that's your motivation. I might not need to do that. I might need to do 10 rounds, but just need to be told I can do it. And like, once you kind of find what makes an athlete tick, then they will buy into your system, and then once they've bought into your system, you're more than likely going to go and have a champion.
When you're saying that, I see the respect you have for Rob is second to none.
Because you've got to want to fight for Rob. I've got to want to fight and die for Rob. So when I'm going out on the battlefield, I don't want to go into a fight and it's like, I don't really get along with my coach. I don't really believe in his system too much. Because this is me. Everyone's different. The other fighter he trains might believe in it wholeheartedly. So I've got to want to fight for this guy.
You give your heart and soul for him.
Yeah, you've got to want it. Yeah.
We'll talk about Usyk. How's the mental approach going towards fighting a southpaw of Usyk's caliber, what he's done as an amateur and as a cruiserweight? What's the mindset there?
So what he's done as a cruiserweight, Archie Moore come up from light heavy to heavyweight, fought some of the great fighters. All boxers can move up weight. Some fighters kind of say, oh, I feel better at the bigger weight, I carry more power, I feel fresher. Do you know what I mean? He's not having to make weight. So I've kind of, in my mind, I've removed away the conversation about this is the heavyweight and he's a cruiserweight. I get that, but I like to challenge myself. So I said, let's remove that out of the way and let's look at where I am at skill-wise, technical-wise, because I've got what I already have anyway, the strength. I've got that. Since I come in boxing in 2008, I kind of had a rapid rise. And that's maybe due to the fact of sheer strength.
Mental strength and heart.
Sheer size and heart, taking on massive challenges early on.
Morning. I'll join later.
David, thank you. Still to come for you this morning. Elections in Russia start today. It's a 3-day process. We'll talk to the Executive Director of the Anti-Corruption Foundation in a couple of minutes.
I lost my father in November 2015. It was a very sudden death. He was a politician. He was in the public eye. So there was a bit of a media storm afterwards, and there was a lot of problems for me to sort out, including insolvency. And I think that at the age of 25, I just wasn't really capable I didn't really understand how to deal with a complex probate estate. And this sort of cycle, this cycle carried on. And as it got worse, I started to develop this terrible binge eating disorder. And I sort of, looked to food as a way of coping with my emotions. And over the period, the next 2 or 3 years, I spiraled from, about 10.5 stone to over 17 stone and just couldn't control it really. I think it was, there was a lot of indicators along the way, including my father's inquest, where because he had a terrible eating disorder as well, and he was obese, that wasn't enough to shock me. When the pathologist said, your father had hypertension and high cholesterol, there was a number of things, people passing me on the tube and thinking I was pregnant, that wasn't enough. Looking at myself in my reflection and realizing that I couldn't fit into anything wasn't enough. Finally, the triggering point for me was when I caught coronavirus and I was lying in the hospital bed. I have an underlying condition. I have rheumatoid arthritis, which was, of course, impacted by my weight gain and my binge eating. And, medical staff at the hospital I was treated at were tired. They were seeing very, very unwell people throughout the first period, the first stage of lockdown. And I think they were tired, and they just turned around to me and said, you wouldn't be so unwell had you looked after yourself, and you've really got to take your health and make it a priority. I never thought that I would be competing on stage with all these wonderful ladies from all different backgrounds. But I think the main thing for me is that it's given me a voice and a platform. Miss Great Britain is a tremendous vehicle for change. And I'm incredibly passionate about reframing eating disorders as the rightful mental health conditions they are, and repositioning them as a public health concern. And also drawing attention to the fact that sometimes complicated grief can really, lead to somebody spiraling out of control. But, you can recover. I am, an example of that. And I want other people to know that, recovery is possible at whatever's happened to you. And, if you seek early intervention, whether it may be depression or an eating disorder, there is help for you.
Does anyone know which particular parts of your body can be damaged by air pollution?
A band of rain and brisk winds in the west will very slowly move eastwards today. Much of Scotland and Northern Ireland will be cloudy with outbreaks of rain, heavy at times. England and Wales will be largely dry with warm, sunny spells. Ireland will brighten up later from the west. Taking a look at the daily air quality index, where levels of air pollution are bandied from 1 being low to 10 being very high, air pollution levels remain low on Friday as breezier and wetter conditions move in from the west.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
Now, voting has begun in Russia's parliamentary elections. Many of President Putin's most vocal critics have been barred from running amid a crackdown on dissidents, and the outcome is regarded as a foregone conclusion. Well, let's talk to Executive Director of the Anti-Corruption Foundation and key ally of Alexei Navalny, Vladimir Ashurkov. Good to see you this morning. I mean, is there any hope whatsoever of this being a free and fair election?
This election wasn't fair and free from the beginning when it started. It was impossible for independent candidates to get on the ballot. The independent media over the last 6 months, most of them have been branded foreign agents and really had difficulty to operate. So the elections have been extended from 1 day to 3 days, which makes it difficult to do election monitoring. So, and we expect also that there will be ballot staffing. So it's very far from fair and free election.
We do know that President Putin's United Russia Party are clearly favourites to win, but the ratings are pretty low. What does that tell us?
Well, the standards of living in Russia have been deteriorating for the last decade. People are becoming more and more disillusioned with Putin's regime, and this will be reflected in the polls.
I mean, where are you on this electronic voting system? I mean, I know this is a 3-day process, of which only the last day is sort of people voting in person. But is there any chance with this new system that could provide a fairer outcome?
The authorities are introduced this electronic system last year, and it allows to vote electronically in several regions of Russia. We expect that this electronic voting system will be used for ballot stuffing and to falsify the results of the election. So we, of course, don't support it.
So what happens after this election result? If this goes as you expect and the United Russia Party wins and you believe it is not a free and fair result, what happens next?
We advocate a system of tactical voting where people vote in a consolidated manner for a candidate that's not a candidate of party of power, but has the best chances to win. We believe that this tactic will enable for maybe 50 candidates, maybe 10% of the parliament to be elected, and there will be independent voices in the parliament, something that was lacking for the last 10 years.
And what difference will that make to how President Putin continues?
The elections are always a point of stress for authoritarian governments like Russia. And we believe that this is also a point of stress for Putin. The frenzy with which the authorities have been banning independent candidates, have been banning applications that allow people to consolidate their votes, shows that they really are afraid of people's expression of people's will in this election.
I mean, what do you think the international community should be doing? I mean, we're sort of stood by and watching at the moment, and there's a lot of international criticism of Russia, but could more be done?
I think it's important to understand that Russia is important, that what happens in Russia is important for everybody. Russia is really assertive, and it meddles in elections in other countries. It conducts political assassinations, including Britain. So Russia and what to do with it has to be high on the agenda in all Western democracies.
OK, Vladimir, good to talk to you. Thank you. This is Sky News. Let's have a look at the weather for you. Now, it's going to be wet at times in the west today, but elsewhere, mostly fine with some warm, sunny spells. Much of England, Wales and eastern Scotland will have a dry start. Patches of low cloud or fog. It's going to be cloudier further west with outbreaks of rain and some brisk winds. See those temperatures, sort of 13 to 16 or thereabouts. Rain, heavy at times, will push pretty slowly eastwards across Ireland, Northern Ireland and Scotland into Cornwall and Pembrokeshire. The rest of Britain will be mostly dry with some warm, sunny spells. Meanwhile, brighter skies and a few scattered showers will follow to Western Ireland. Now, during the afternoon, skies are going to brighten across Ireland and Northern Ireland. However, there will be some rain. That should affect western fringes of Britain, heaviest over parts of Scotland, as you can see. I mean, particularly in the west of Scotland. The rain band will stall. It should weaken overnight, leaving a zone of thicker cloud and patchy rain stretching from eastern Scotland to southwest England. Either side of that, mostly dry with some clear spells and fog patches. Well, stay with us here on Sky News. Still to come for you this morning, violence against women is an epidemic. That's the findings of a new report following the death of Sarah Everard. And a decision is expected on whether or not to scrap PCR travel tests when you head into the UK.
It was my vision to come and protect wildlife in the future. Animals like lion can enter into bomas, they kill their livestock, and this leads to human-wildlife conflict.